I am here with Lara Friedman, president of the Foundation for Middle East Peace. Lara, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Great to talk to you, Sarah.
So let's start with what's new and what's not new in these elections.
Look, I mean, what's new is you now have really the mask torn off the Israeli political scene. The fact is, and I'm sure other people you're talking to will talk about the fact that Kahanism has largely been normalized. It's become part of the weave or woven into Israeli politics now for years, where even the most centrist governments, if you do what I do and periodically take out one of Meir Kahane's books and read through it, you're like, wow, this sounds a lot like what the so-called centrists are saying today. So, I mean, Kahanism was already present and normalized in the Israeli political system. What's different now is you have really the masks off and the unabashed, the folks who will take the sharper edges of Kahanism and point them into the Israeli body politic at the people they don't like. And they've been doing that for years. And now they are going to be in positions of greater power to do that.
Great. Thank you, Lara. You've talked before about your affinity for reading Kahana and getting to know him deeply when we did that webinar on Kahanism and how it became mainstream.
Yep.
So, okay, as we're moving into this new world, masks are off, Kahanist elbows are in. What are you watching? What are you keeping your eyes on? And what do you think is most important for people to be watching right now?
I think that the important thing to watch is what you should have been watching all along, which is the erosion of any pretense of respect for human rights, civil rights, legal rights of Palestinians, certainly in the occupied territories, but also increasingly inside the Green Line. That's what people should have been paying attention to already. The failure of the world to pay attention and to hold Israel accountable as it veered further and further into Kahanist style policies, which have been going on obviously for more than 50 years, is why we're here today, right? So to the extent that we are now in a different game, it's not an entirely new game, but people need to keep their eye on the ball. There are people on the ground on both sides of the Green Line that stand to be targeted even more tomorrow than they were yesterday. And yesterday they were already targeted. It's worth remembering that it was under the more moderate government that we just lost, or Israel just lost, that you had Israel declare 6 Palestinian NGOs, including the most prominent Arab human rights NGO in the region, to be terrorist organizations. It was under the last government that you had zero accountability demanded or provided for the death of an American citizen who was a journalist, or an American citizen elderly man, or the tens of Palestinians killed every month, or the raging settler violence, which is supported by the IDF. That's already happening. Looking at where things can go, I mean, it doesn't, nobody enjoys a slippery slope argument warning where things could go. It's immediately dismissed as not relevant. It's like, especially if it's things people don't want to hear. I think if you look at the here and now, it's terrible. If you take people like Ben-Gvir at their word, they intend to make it much worse. They intend to harness the existing political trends and some of the legislation which has been passed. And let's remember, the Supreme Court, not a couple of months ago, essentially gave the green light for Israel to take away the citizenship of quote unquote disloyal Arab citizens, or disloyal citizens writ large, but it's clearly aimed at Palestinians. It's not aimed at the broader population, although who knows, maybe it'll be used against leftists as well, right? But I mean, he's been very clear, we are the landlords here in this country, and if you're disloyal, you're gonna get you out. There's a commentator, there's a discussion on Twitter, or I think earlier today or yesterday, about whether the new government is going to be more of the same. We exchanged one pro-apartheid government for another pro-apartheid government. And an academic in the UK named Yair Wallach commented, we've actually exchanged a pro-apartheid government for, I believe he said, a pro-expulsionist government. and you need to pay attention. People are telling you who they are and what they intend to do. So if you want to figure out what to watch for, listen to what they say they're going to do.
You've said that for a long, long time, that people will tell you, listen to what they say they're going to do. So on that matter, we are now a few days ahead of the US elections. What are you thinking about people telling you what they doing what they say they're going to do, or what they say they're going to do? How are you thinking about the US elections and the intersection with Israel-Palestine and this new Israeli government?
I mean, speaking as someone who follows very far right-wing Twitter and listservs and everything else, I have to believe that on the right, within the Republican caucuses in Congress, that the victory of Bibi is clearly seen as a victory for their cause. I mean, the Republicans were very comfortable with Bibi. He is their guy. Ted Cruz tweeted out something very positive about, well done, Israel, for reelecting Bibi. Nikki Haley tweeted out something approving, along, of course, with Viktor Orban and, the usual suspects who are very happy with this new government. But, to the extent that the US is facing its own battle between very, I want to say liberals, I mean, between a side that is relatively progressive and having some trouble holding its own, and a surging illiberal movement, which is tapping into the most ultra-nationalistic, xenophobic, tribalist, racist trends in American society, I think you have a lot of common cause. And, assuming that we see it seems very likely that Democrats are going to lose at least the House and also maybe the Senate. I mean, I think one should prepare themselves for a Congress where standing with an illiberal Israeli government shoulder to shoulder is absolutely what you will see. And you would probably see that anyway. Again, we've seen this already, even when you have Democrats in the House and Senate and progressives, you've seen a fair amount of standing shoulder to shoulder, no matter what Israel does. Again, impunity is why we're here. But, impunity on steroids, for the past 2 years, it's been in the interests of Democratic leaders to not have a lot of fights about Israel, particularly in the House, because it doesn't look good for them when their own party is fighting about this. That's something that Republicans use against them. That won't be the case probably in the next Congress. And if people are looking to the White House, hoping that the White House will stand in the way of really problematic moves in Congress that are framed as pro-Israel, I think there's going to be a problem there, because I think you're already seeing the legacy Jewish American organizations making clear that they are going to work really, really hard to stand by Israel, no matter what Israel says or does, right? This is about shared values, which really tells us a lot about what those values are. And in parallel, you've got a White House, which is the hallmark of its time in office so far has been avoiding any conflict with Israel. I don't see that mentality changing. And on top of that, they're going to be in their own election cycle as of next week. They already are to some extent, but as of next week, we're in full-on presidential election cycle. And we saw what happened with the Israel issue and AIPAC and United Democracy Project, and the role that it is playing in this election cycle. I can't imagine the Democratic Party or the White House want to do anything that they think will make them more vulnerable to those attacks, which of course doesn't matter, because they'll still be attacked by the right as insufficiently pro-Israel or as anti-Semitic, no matter what they do. That's the reality. So they end up losing the initiative to actually have a responsible, visionary leadership kind of policy, and then they're still attacked. So lose-lose.
Do you see any opportunity here in this new government?
I mean, I'd be curious to actually hear what my Palestinian colleagues on the ground would say about that. I think that it starts to feel a little bit weak as Israel elects each time a more openly racist, openly pro-settlement government to say, okay, fine, at least we have clarity. And it's sort of like, well, maybe this is as bad as it can get. And I hesitate when people say things like that, because it always seems like it can get worse for the people who are at the sharp end of the stick. But it is clarity. And to some extent, the there's a lot of questions now about, what it will mean to normalize or not normalize Ben-Gvir. And it's like, I have to say, for me, the idea that this is going to be some sort of test, will the international community, we'll deal with the government, but we won't meet with Ben-Gvir. I mean, that's really performative garbage. The fact is, you're still going to be dealing with a government whose policies are imbued with the philosophy of Ben-Gvir. That's why he's there. And they already were imbued with those ideas. The fact that you somehow can pat yourself on the back because you're spending political capital to say, I won't stand in the same room with that guy, even though I will basically support his cause and normalize what he's doing, is pretty empty. I feel like that's the line that people are setting out. And I feel like it's a line that absolutely will not hold. I'm very skeptical that certainly in the US, that line will hold for more than a day. But even if it does, it isn't meaningful. I mean, Bibi in his previous rounds in office has done everything possible to make sure there will never be Palestinian rights. There will never be Palestinian self-determination. If you're someone who believes in the two-state solution and says, but he still uses those words, listen to what he's doing. Listen to him when he's not talking to the international community. Listen to him when he's speaking in Hebrew in a house in the West Bank. He's absolutely clear in his intention to make sure there's never a Palestinian state, there's never Palestinian self-determination, and Israel retains permanent control over the West Bank. That's what he's doing. So, patting yourself on the back and saying, listen, I'm not normalizing Khanis because I won't be with Ben-Gvir is incredibly weak.
Thank you for all of that. So my last question for you then is there can you sum up or just offer a takeaway for our audience?
I mean, the takeaway, I don't want to be repetitive. I mean, we are where we are today because people chose not to see what was happening and they chose not to engage with what was happening. And I say this to someone who in every conversation now ends up playing the really annoying role of Cassandra, warning people about what's happening, knowing that people are just not going to take it in. They don't want to. And then when it does happen, it's going to be kind of like, well, it's not that bad and we can live with it, or who could have known and it's too late to do anything anyway. If you choose to disengage while you watch these things happening in Israel, and by the way, in the United States, I mean, we're in a moment now where the Supreme Court may or may not agree to hear a case on boycotts, and it's a case on boycotts of Israel. So most people are probably not paying attention because most people don't care about this issue. But if the Supreme Court takes this case and rules to uphold the arguments that have been the argument that's being appealed, what they in effect will be ruling is that boycotts of anything are not protected free speech. They will be undoing what was settled law since the civil rights era, and it will affect every issue that people care about. That's what's at stake. And that the fact that we're having this argument potentially at the Supreme Court is because a lot of good people whose comfort zone is violated by the idea of Palestinians standing up and saying, no, we're not going to just wait for negotiations. We're gonna go for the most widely accepted form of protest, which is boycotts. They say, we're going to stop you. And if in order to stop you, we have to take down all Americans' right to protest with boycotts, we'll do it, which is just surreal. I say this as a progressive American who grew up in a progressive Jewish home. It is surreal that's where we are today. It's surreal that right now we're seeing the Morningstar case. For folks who haven't looked into it, you should. The Morningstar case is essentially the broad Jewish community saying, in order to prevent any scrutiny of Israeli practices by investors, we're willing to take down the entire concept that there should be rules on ethical investing for social reasons, governance reasons, human rights reasons, environmental reasons, none of those. If in order to prevent Israel from being caught in any screen that in any way challenges its activities, particularly in the West Bank, we will take down the whole thing, so be it. And when we get there, people look back and say, this is terrible. How do we get here? This is how you got here. And this is how you ended up with Kahanism alive and well and flourishing in Israel. And the last thing I want to say in terms of people thinking about this today, the American component in this cannot be ignored. Meir Kahane was American. The leaders of the Kahanist movement in Israel came from the States to Israel. The funders came from Israel, from the US. The fundraising was done in the US. This is in many ways an American political stream brought into Israel, where it found fertile ground for lots of reasons. But the idea that Americans are now pulling at their hair saying, how did this happen? You know, shared values. You know, when people talk about shared values, looking at the situation in Israel today, they're not entirely wrong. May not be your shared values, but they're somebody's shared values. And the unwillingness of Jewish Americans and of Congress and of successive presidents to grapple with this is how we got where we are today. That can be changed. If you want better politicians, you better get out there and work for it. If you want better results, you better get out there and work for it. Pulling your hair out and saying, okay, well, I'm going to draw a line in the sand and I won't talk to that guy. I guess boycotts are okay in some cases. That is performative, and it is something you do so you can look in the mirror and feel better about yourself. It doesn't actually mean that you're doing anything to actually implement the values or defend the values that you say you hold.
Great. Lara, thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to invite the audience to watch this space to hear more about all of the things that you just talked about, and to look through our events index to see more on what we've done on Kahanism, on the role of AIPAC and the United Democracy Project in the American elections, and also on all of these threats to our First Amendment rights, which you just articulated for us so clearly. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah Ann. Good night.